The fall session is scheduled to begin September 15th, so it's a perfect time for a civil dialogue with the two leaders of the State Assembly, talking about previewing that fall session. I want to thank Assembly Speaker Robin Voss, represents the 63rd District, and Assembly Democratic Leader Peter Barca, represents the 64th. Gentlemen, thank you.
Steve, good to be back.
I'm trying to get an update on some issues, so I'm just going to go down my list.
Sure. Rapid fire.
Mr. Speaker, let's talk about GAB. Have you seen anything you can accept the next version of GAB yet, sir?
So my colleague, Representative D-Kenosha, is spearheading that in the Republican side of the aisle in the Assembly. I know he has been working with Senator Fitzgerald on that. There have been multiple discussions. We have not settled on a final product that we want to launch to the public and really sit down and talk about it with folks. But definitely there is a discussion to make sure that the GAB goes back to a model which was more similar to the one that they had as opposed to the current model.
Well, would that be, you and I have heard so many different iterations. Which one do you think makes the most sense, sir?
So I think that the very notion that you have people who are nonpartisan is difficult for most people to accept. Every single person has a partisan viewpoint when they begin. And my basic understanding is I would rather have people be upfront about that and have a discussion so it's out in the open, as opposed to people being under the guise of thinking they're nonpartisan when every human being has partisan inclinations. And that's why I think that the idea that the Elections Board had before, where it was much more focused on, Republicans and Democrats being equal, so we had a guarantee that each side was represented. It was bipartisan. We had a lot of discussions. Almost all the matters were handled internally, and I think they did a good job. Are there ways we can improve it? Yeah, one of the ideas that my colleague Representative Bernier has been pushing very hard is to have people who have expertise to be on the board. So as an example, she likes an idea of having a Republican and a Democratic county clerk because they actually run elections. They understand how elections work. I think that's a good idea. So I think there are lots of concepts out there like that, not just putting people like Peter and me on there, but people who actually have expertise in running elections, having run for office, having some sort of expertise to bring to the table.
Two very quick follow-ups before I give Peter a chance. Do you foresee this kicking in time, of course, for the 2016 elections? Because there might be 3 million votes cast for president here in November 2016. And the second question is, do you foresee a continued role for judges? Excuse me for interrupting.
So I've really never had as big an issue with having judges, as long as they are, once again, it's understood how they are appointed. There's not this appearance of impropriety, which is probably not exactly accurate. So I'm not opposed to that. I think it's probably likely we wouldn't have judges, because I think if we could do things like a county clerk or people who have some expertise, they've actually run for office. Many of these judges haven't had a campaign in decades. So to say that they are more up to date on what's happening in elections than a county clerk, I don't agree with that. So I think it's definitely an option we could look at. I would love to have them up and going by the time we get to the spring elections, which I think is likely. My hope is that we're able to actually pass these bills this fall, giving plenty of opportunity for us to ensure that we have a transition process. So way before we take out nomination papers for us to run for re-election next April, we'd have a new board in place, new people hired, ensuring that we have a fair process. Once again, Republicans and Democrats equal, so there's no partisan advantage, unlike now.
And thanks for your patience, Peter. Your reaction to changes that seem to be coming for GAB?
Well, the irony of this is that the retired judges that currently serve on the GAB, the majority of whom have been appointed by Governor Walker, and I believe every one of them are Republicans. So it's ironic that that's not satisfying Governor Walker and the Republican leadership. 128 of the 132 legislators voted less than 10 years ago to get rid of the old system because it was fraught with so many problems. And personally, I like the idea of having retired judges. I think judges are used to having to look at both sides of every issue. I think when you're a judge, you sort of remove that partisan cap of saying, I'm going to do what's right for my party, and instead say I'm going to do what's right for justice and do what's right for the state. So I think it's a mistake personally. I haven't seen any bill. I know they're still dealing with it, but I hope they give the public plenty of time. I hope that there is, the public has weeks of time to look at these bills, to be able to come and testify. This is something people understand. And, it's ironic because normally for election type laws, people don't pay as close of attention, but I hear a lot about this when I'm in the Kenosha-Racine area.
Any follow-up on that?
No, I think Peter's right. I want to make sure we have ample opportunity for people to let us know what they think. I think that, I voted for that bill 10 years ago, and I think it's fair for me to say that as I look back, my intended goal of making it less partisan really hasn't worked out. I think, unfortunately, we've seen partisan witch hunts. We've seen, federal judges have to order things to stop. That should never happen. And if we had a more collegial process where we had, once again, Republicans and Democrats working together to make sure that they are the ones who are running these operations, not a rogue agency director where he really seems to be dictating to the judges what they do as opposed to the reverse, I just think it'll be better for the process.
Thank you.
I just worry, I mean, that, right now we have an election and ethics watchdog type agency. And I just worry we're going to turn them into partisan lapdogs. And I just don't think it served us well in the past. I haven't seen any significant evidence to believe that somehow we'd be better served if we return to the past. But it'll be very interesting once we have hearings and allow the people a chance to testify.
New subject. Peter, you serve on the WEDC board. WEDC seems to be starting over again with the appointment now of Mr. Mark Hogan. Are there any more statutory changes that you'd like to see in WEDC, or should we let the new CEO of WEDC pick his leadership team and go ahead? Do we need any more statutory, and are you optimistic that Mr. Hogan can kind of get over some of the problems that the agency has had in the 4
We
years?
need significant statutory changes. There'll be a hearing tomorrow on the audit that covered WEDC. It was probably one of the most critical audits that we've seen over the course of the past 2 years. But subsequent to that, there has been investigative report after investigative report about serious potential ethical lapses and just incompetence in so many cases where we're not even doing legal reviews in many cases before money is dispersed. That's outrageous. The taxpayers deserve better than that. Clearly, the audit suggests some statutory changes that can be made and should be made. Senator Lassa and I also have introduced past reform legislation. The board has introduced past reform legislation, and somehow it passes one of the houses but never reaches the other house. So I know the board themselves support statutory changes, and I hope we can make them. Mark Hogan, I think he at least has private sector and financial experience. That's good. I would have rather, frankly, we would have done what the Be Bold Advisory Committee suggested, which is to pick world-class leadership, somebody that's successfully run an economic development agency. After all, we're 35th, 37th, depending on how you measure it, but in jobs. So we clearly need an overhaul here. So I'm glad we have new leadership. I think Mr. Hogan has all the potential to do a good job. I look forward to working with him, but we clearly need significant statutory changes.
Robin, does your team want to give Mr. Hogan a chance at WEDC before you make any more statutory changes?
Well, I do agree with Peter that there are definite issues that need to be addressed. That's why, even though some in my party have proposed taking legislators off the WEDC board, I've opposed that effort. I think it's good to have people watching out for taxpayers in both elected and private sector roles. I think that's good. I think Mr. Hogan seems like, I've never met him, so I can't say that I know anything about him more than what I've read in the news reports, but he seems like a very capable, able person who's going to be able to take this agency and take it up a notch. I think WEDC does many good things, but I think there are many things that need to improve. I think that's part of what, unfortunately, people have made WEDC into kind of a partisan punching bag, and I think that's really unfortunate because there is nothing that's more important than creating jobs. And figuring a way to try to improve the agency should be something that's done on a bipartisan basis, but it seems, unfortunately, like Republicans often defend the agency and Democrats often attack it. And probably on both aspects, it'd be awfully nice if we could figure out a way to work together, make the agency as effective as it possibly could be, kind of put down the swords and figure out a way to make it work.
Do you see these WEDC changes, though, coming before the fall of the spring session, sir?
I think it's possible. Once again, I want to see the exact ideas of what they are. Once again, I think that WEDC has done some good things. They have helped to bring companies to Wisconsin. They have done good things. Have they followed all the rules? It seems like from the audit they could do better, so I'm not going to defend everything that they've done. But I also don't think we want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, geez, let's just go back to the old way of working, because that certainly was unsuccessful as well. So we definitely need to be open-minded about finding a way to make it more effective. But hopefully that'll happen within the next few months as the new CEO comes and says, here are changes we need to make. Listen to the board. I've talked to Mr. Ahrens, and I know they have some ideas they'd like to work on. So I think there's a lot of potential.
New subject. During the summer, both houses, committees in both houses agreed to changes to the John Doe process. Mm-hmm. That seems to be, seems that there's agreement between leaders of both houses on those changes, Mr. Speaker?
So for me, really all three of the topics are interrelated. Reforming the John Doe process, the GAB board and how it's governed, and then campaign finance and updating what the Supreme Court has now said are the rules of Wisconsin. Just like I don't necessarily agree with Obamacare, but it's the law of the land. I don't necessarily agree with same-sex marriage, but it's the law of the land and we have to accept it. Peter doesn't agree with an awful lot of the campaign finance changes, but I hope he would look and say, it's the law of the land and you have to codify it as long as the court says that's the law we have to live under. So that's what I'm hoping we'll be able to do, is to bring all three forward, to say we are going to codify a lot of the changes that have been requested or required by the courts as they've gone through this process. We're going to fix the GAB so there can't be more partisan witch hunts. And frankly, the John Doe process is about so much more than just campaign finance. We're really the only state in the entire country that has this ability for a star chamber for any charge. It's not just about politics. It could be about racketeering, or it could be about common crimes where they're able to form a John Doe. You can't ask people to talk about it. It's a secrecy oath in essence. All those things are just wrong to me. So it's kind of brought to light by this entire aspect of campaign finance, but John Doe is a lot more than just about that, but they are all interrelated and hopefully we'll change them all.
Peter, two members of your team in the Assembly Committee, Representative Wachs and Representative Hebel, said this is a terrible exemption when you narrow the John Doe. Is that going to be the argument when it's debated here on this floor, sir?
Well, I think that they're rightfully concerned about our reputation as a state and about giving the public somehow this impression that political crimes should be exempt from John Doe, but white-collar crimes or other crimes shouldn't be. I mean, it almost makes it look as though we're trying to exclude the political class from going through the same process that the public has to go through. So, I think they called it the Corrupt Politician Protection Act or something like that.
They did.
And the issue there is that I think we have to be so cautious. Wisconsin has had a long positive reputation for clean, open, and transparent government. And let's not forget, this John Doe process was used successfully to prosecute and to put in jail in some cases, but 6 of the governor's close associates, political operatives, and staff either pleaded guilty or were convicted and put in jail. So it's not as if the John Doe has not worked. It's actually worked quite successfully in that first John Doe. Now, the second John Doe is what the speaker's referring to, because obviously they were able to convince a federal judge to put a halt to it. And then, of course, the state Supreme Court, that unfortunately so often operates on sort of a partisan versus a nonpartisan approach, took a similar action. But I'm very concerned, and I know it worked successfully in the first case, so I'm very worried about trying to take away those prosecutorial tools for political crimes.
Well, the term was used by Democrats that this is a Corrupt Politician Protection Act. So I'm going to give you a short chance to respond to that.
It's unfortunate that so many things kind of denigrate into just name calling. I think there is a serious problem here where, in every other state, once again, 49 other states, they use a process with a grand jury. They don't allow these secretive hearings. They don't allow people to be required to sign secrecy oaths, regardless of what the crime is. If it were me, I would probably take away the John Doe in all circumstances and have them go to a grand jury. But we tried to compromise with prosecutors who want that tool. So I think that at least looking at some of the transgressions that have occurred and say, let's at least right this wrong, should be something that should get broad bipartisan support. But unfortunately, everything that has Governor Walker's name associated with it turns into a partisan punching bag.
New subject. Peter, I think it's Assembly Bill 220. This is the Fetal Tissue Act. Mm-hmm. The amendment was just announced, and I want to be sure I get it right. It would allow research on tissue from procedures done before January 1. Do I have that right, Mr. Speaker?
January 1, 2015, yep.
January 1 of 2015. Mm-hmm. Now, this is a change from the original amendment. Does this soften at all your party's opposition to it?
Well, look, I hope we can work with the speaker on this issue, because this is a very important issue, far more important than I think people understand. The BioForward organization that testified and is rightfully extremely concerned said there's $27 billion at stake in terms of our economy, over 100,000 jobs, and it's one of the big growth elements of our economy. So we have to be careful with whatever we do that we get it right. And I know that they've been working on a compromise themselves. I met with the BioForward personnel. I've met with the deans of the medical college here of UW, and I've talked with the Medical College of Wisconsin. I know the Technology Council and many other businesses are extremely concerned. So this is one that I hope that we can work together and try and find a substitute that would make some sense and make sure that we don't put forward something that unwittingly ends up really jeopardizing one of the big growth elements of our economy here. There's already federal law that protects the sale of fetal tissue, And I'm not sure we need to do anything at this juncture, but I know the Republicans feel strongly they want to pass something. So I hope that if in fact they do want to go down that road, which it appears they want to, that we work together and that we are sensitive to how critical this research is in the state of Wisconsin. And we have a competitive edge in this regard in Wisconsin. It's one of the areas that our research and technology, and you go out to the research park at UW and many other places around the state, and there's some exciting things happening. And this is where you get a cure potentially to Alzheimer's. You get a cure to things like leukemia and other diseases. So we have to be very cautious here.
Do you think the January 1, 2015 date is a reasonable compromise?
I do. I mean, public testimony makes a difference, and people came to the hearing that we held almost a month ago. Medical College of Wisconsin talked about the fact that one of the things that they were hoping for is that the date would be moved up, so you'd have more opportunity to utilize, especially the research that they're already doing. So that's what's included in the amendment. We listened to the medical community. There are some who just don't want restrictions, and they would prefer to have, an opportunity to utilize whatever tissue is harvested whenever it is. And I just can't support that. When I look at the basic idea, for anybody who took the time to watch those Planned Parenthood videos, the series of the 7 or 8 different videos, it is disgusting the way that they talked about unborn children being chopped up and sold for profit as if it was nothing different than a piece of garbage. I think that's awful. So this is a common sense way for us to look and say, under our proposal, even with the amendment that's being adopted, the compromise amendment, you would still be able to have the use of more recent tissue as long as it's done in an ethical manner. It's not harvested from an abortion. But if it is a way there are lots of ways for them to be able to find mechanisms to do it. They might not be as cheap. It might require a more ethical process that potentially could be slightly more expensive, but the same opportunity exists for those life-saving advances using all different types of tissue. But it has to be done in an ethical way. So I really think that our amendment addresses most of the legitimate concerns that were out there. And for some who want a Katie bar the door attitude, I'm sorry, I just can't support that.
Any quick follow-up, Peter, on that subject, or shall we move on?
Well, only that I think that I don't think that that's a solution. But I'm hoping we'll have some meaningful discussions and involve people that know this well. This is a very critical area that scientists and researchers depend on, and we need to clearly tread very lightly here.
Okay, new subject. Mr. Speaker, Representative Terry Katzma and a few others are talking about how to realign or merge the 13 two-year colleges and the 16 tech colleges. Mm-hmm. At what point will you form a task force, or will this be a public, this issue and the discussion come out into the public, sir?
So the process of beginning to do research is something that happens every day in the Capitol, right? Today I'm sure Peter Barca and his office came out with some different idea that they would like to propose. They probably talked about it with their members. They had a discussion with interest groups. They drafted a bill and they proposed it. That's kind of the normal process that we go through. Once in a while, you have an opportunity for legislators to sit down and talk about a topic because they have a similar interest. So during the discussion that we had in the budget, we know that there had to be reductions at the UW system. We know that there were efficiencies that have to be gathered, and we are now looking for those. So Terry Katzma and others said, you know what, maybe there are some ways we could find areas that tech colleges and two-year universities could find ways to work together to save money and improve services for students. But they're just in the very early stages of discussing it. So they haven't drafted a bill, they don't have a specific idea, they don't have a budget proposal for next time around, they're just looking for ideas.
And sometimes you deal with these issues by forming task forces.
Yeah,
are you considering forming one on this issue?
Not at this point, but I mean, they have to do their research first. If they come to me and say, hey, you know what, we think this has got some merit, we'd like to involve people from both parties, we'd like to bring people in for testimony to have a discussion about it, then we'll do that. But it is way early on that. So
as a former chairman,
nothing will happen during the course of the session regarding this topic, but it's something that we should at least look at.
As a former chairman of Joint Finance,
Yeah.
do you think there are some savings in realigning or merging these UW
I think there's
colleges?
a possibility, sure. I think if you look at some places around the state, literally the tech college and the two-year campus are within walking distance of each other. They offer very similar classes. We are now saying to people, hey, go and take a couple of years at the tech school, which is cheaper, and then transfer into the UW system. Maybe there are ways we could increase the transferability. Maybe there are ways that we could have cross-collateralization of taking classes at both campuses and allowing them to transfer over to the university simpler. So I think there's all kinds of good ideas because our goal is for a cheaper, higher quality education for people who want to go beyond high school, if it's the tech school or it's the university. Because don't forget, we're one of the only states in the country that does not have a community college system. We have the 2-year campuses and we have the technical college system. And one of the areas that I know we have talked about is there's this unfortunate stereotype that if you go to a tech school, you're getting a lower quality or a lesser quality education than going to a 2-year campus. In fact, I wish it would be the same. People should look at higher education, that they are a great opportunity if you're going to be a plumber or somebody who's going to be a PhD. Each has value, and each should have an opportunity to get a good education.
Peter, thanks for your patience. The speaker says these are not yet discussions that should be done in public. Your reaction?
Well, I would just say that I know it raised the blood pressure, though, of many people in the higher education field around the state, just because when they start hearing about these discussions, we know how quickly many times Republicans move bills, whether it be right to work, whatever it might be. So I know I did a 6-city swing back a couple weeks ago, and this came up pretty regularly around the state. And part of the problem is that with the $250 million cut of the University of Wisconsin system and the money that was taken out of the technical college, there's grave concern that the people in higher education are not being consulted when changes are being made. They're not part of the process. And they feel like it's vital that they be in the room and that they be part of the discussion. Now, I don't disagree with the speaker that people meet together individually and look at bills. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think that the way it was unraveled and the idea that it sort of came out that there were these meetings. I know Representative Dana Wachs sent a letter, hey, I'd like to be in these meetings if you're going to do this. But I think that we have to be cautious as lawmakers, that we don't send out signals somehow, and especially now, I think, Chancellor Blank has indicated that many of her staff are being poached by other universities, and they're looking whether or not to leave the state. And at this point, I think tensions are very high because states around us have invested more in higher education, while our governor has made the decision, and unfortunately it passed, that we reduce the amount of investment that we have in higher education. So I just think we have to be so cautious, and I don't think it was the speaker's intent to do that. I don't even know if you're involved in it, but I think these lawmakers that got together, you got to consider the context in which you're in. I think that, as a consequence, I think that the wrong signals were sent. People are very worried.
But let's remember, the reason that it came out was because those members who were interested in it brought in the chancellor from the UW system to actually talk about it. So there was no secretive process. The reason it came out is because she was honest, I think, in an interview on Wisconsin Eye,
yes,
simply saying she had met with some people
Chancellor
to talk about this as a concept.
Yes.
So there's nothing secret. I think it's just what we should be doing, which is to seek out experts, ask for information, and try to make informed decisions.
Very quick follow-up on this subject. Is there similar interest in discussions in the Senate, or is this an issue in which only Assembly members are discussing right
Frankly,
now?
I have no idea if the Senate's talking about it or not.
Okay.
But I know the vocational colleges, now I don't believe they were involved. And so in talking to a couple of the senior presidents, they just said, well, what's going on here? And how come I'm not involved? And I said, look, I'm not sure where this is at. We're making inquiries. But, it's how, things develop where people become very worried. And right now, in the environment in which we're in, with $250 million pulled out of higher education, rightfully so.
And one other new subject. I interviewed Transportation Secretary Gottlieb last week. He said that he's been told by legislative leaders that to not yet bring forth the request for the additional $350 million in bonding. Is your House, your members?
That was not from us.
That was not, okay.
Oh.
Comes from the Senate.
Well, yes.
So would you like to see that 350, 200 year one, 150 come forth and be approved as soon as possible?
When we negotiated the final deal on spending on transportation, of course, $500 million was the number. We had said we would put $350 million in the joint finance appropriation and allow the department to come forward and make requests based on the need. My understanding is they have a request for about $200 million to do I-90 from Madison to Janesville, around 441, and I think one other project here in Dane County, all of which, if they don't figure out a way to get those lets out relatively soon, is going to increase the cost of the projects. I mean, we can't get them done next spring. So I'm hopeful that this fall we'll be able to get the Joint Finance Committee to come together, take up those requests, and move the money forward so we can get those people working and get the projects done, but we're still negotiating on that.
Would you encourage your members on Joint Finance to approve this additional $350 million in bonding authority, Peter?
Well, we definitely feel there's more money needed for transportation in this state. Obviously, we tried in the Finance Committee to bring back indexing, which had we still had indexing, there'd be close to $1 billion more in the transportation fund. Secretary Gottlieb, I think, has done a remarkable job under very difficult circumstances, trying to come up with funding ideas. In this case, trying to move forward with projects. I'm glad to hear the speaker say that, in terms of the cost, we don't want to increase the cost of that it's going to have these major projects that are very significant for economic development in the state go forward. But we've got some serious issues here. I think infrastructure has taken a huge hit, and infrastructure is really one of the key elements that can tell you what kind of economic development you're going to have over the next decade. So I hope we can have a significant discussion about how we can go about to ensure that we fully fund infrastructure development in the state.
Just a few more questions. Mr. Speaker, it came out today. You still believe that the legislature should be exempt from the open records law to determine what communications with constituents and other communications should be, that the legislature should be able to set its own rules on that subject, right?
Well, first of all, I believe that as an institution, the legislature should be able to set its own rules, just like we can the days we're on the floor, the opportunity for us to work with our staff, the opportunity for us to interact with the public. One of the things that we tried to do during the open records discussion was to ensure that when somebody contacts their legislator, they have a right to privacy. It's ironic in a world where so many people have concerns about their data being stolen, information being put on the internet, that on this topic, some people feel like there should be absolutely, once you contact an elected official, everything's open records, you're kind of out of luck that you put your information to the public. I think if somebody writes us and they have a concern about a family member, or they want to deal with their unemployment case or disability or anything like that, I think they should have a reasonable expectation of privacy, and that's where it all started.
Okay.
So there is no effort to change the open records law at this point, but do I think that there should be a discussion to say whether or not that's an appropriate opportunity for us to talk about? I think the discussion should
But you
happen.
told the news conference that you're not going to pursue this change this session, correct, sir?
Yeah.
Peter, constitutional amendment, I heard your party say? Explain that, please.
Right, I helped put forward that constitutional change. We saw how quickly open records could be in jeopardy. I mean, with the 999 motion that came forward late in the night before a holiday weekend, hoping the budget would pass the next week. Clearly there were some people there, I don't know if it was the governor primarily or what the story was, but obviously there were people that were trying to make significant degradation of our right to open records. And I'm concerned. I'm especially concerned. I mean, I always say we're temps. We're elected for a short period of time to do what's right by the people of Wisconsin and be good guardians of this state, a state that's always believed in clean, open, and transparent government. And I want to make sure I leave for my children and grandchildren, who I hope will live in Wisconsin, that same quality reputation. You don't have to look far across the state border from where the Speaker and I lived, Illinois. The last two governors are in prison. And they have just a terrible reputation for clean, open, and transparent government.
So you'd like to
I'm
put...
very concerned. I'd like to have that in the Constitution, that people have a right to, open records. Now, can there be any tweaking ever of anything? That's one thing. But the issue is the right that people can at least appeal to their government to find out how bills were passed, why certain things were done, where they can find out where potentially corruption's rearing its ugly head. I'm concerned about that. And that's why I think it would be appropriate to enshrine in our Constitution the right to open records.
Mr. Speaker, follow up?
So what happened today, unfortunately, is a liberal interest group, for purely partisan political reasons, took issues that were brought up in July that are long dead and brought them up today after Labor Day to try to give another opportunity for people to bash on Republicans. And I think that that is literally the world that we live in, where that issue is dead, but people keep churning up the same thing because they have such empty, tired rhetoric, they don't have much left. So we've already said the issue is not going to happen. There are legitimate things that we can talk about, but the issue is not going to be dealt with this session.
The only thing I'd say, though, in that regard is, look, it's hard for me. I do believe the Speaker, if he said he's not going to bring it up, I think he'll make every effort not to do that. But with the governor, I can't have that level of confidence, because he told the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel in the middle of his campaign that he was not pushing it, he would not support right to work in this session. So I'm not sure the governor's not still going to push this and try and bring enormous pressure to bear on the Speaker and Majority Leader to push something like this through. So I think we have to be vigilant. So, I take Speaker at his word. I think I'm sure he means well to make sure that this doesn't come forward. But I saw with the governor, something near and dear to my heart, which is this right to work issue. And despite a promise made, it couldn't have been any clearer. what he told the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel when he needed those votes in the heart of his campaign, and then completely reversed himself.
Let's end, because we're almost out of time, with 2 questions on presidential politics. Mr. Speaker, we have seen Governor Walker drop in the polls. If he asked you for advice leading to the September 16th debate, what advice would you give him in terms of how to do better, come back?
So Governor Walker has a habit of honestly, forthrightly answering every question. And sometimes when somebody asks you a dumb question, it's okay for you to say, well, that's a dumb question. And I think Governor Walker is way too polite for that. So even when the question was brought up about this Canadian border wall, and if you saw what he said was, well, one person brought it up, it's not really an issue, and all of a sudden he's for a Canadian border wall. Never said that. So I think he just needs to be more genuine, more of who he is, and talk about what he knows is important for America, not what somebody who wants to have a discussion and get him off track talks about. I think the other thing that he's got to do is he's got to show why he's a leader for our state and our country. And that's because he's tough and he sticks with what he believes in, and he has strongly held principles. And I think that's what America loves
Quick
about him.
follow-up. Help us understand what the New York Times called the summer of Trump. And who are his followers, and what are the odds that he's going to be your party's presidential nominee, Mr. Speaker?
Well, it's not zero. I mean, I wouldn't say that. I mean, if you would have asked me a year ago, I would have said he had a 0 chance. Now it's, a number that's higher than 0, than less than 50. So I don't know what it is. But I will say that, what I have gotten from folks as I have been home for the past 8 weeks is really such a frustration with what they view as an imperial presidency. The way that you name a mountain in the government is to actually pass a bill. The way that you make changes to law is you actually pass a bill. And now we see a president, because he doesn't compromise, he doesn't negotiate, he doesn't sit down and talk with anybody, just do everything by executive order. And so many people look at that and say, if there's an imperial presidency, I want somebody who is going to be just as tough on the other side as what Barack Obama is doing in such a partisan, manipulative way. That is not good, in my opinion. I am not a Donald Trump supporter. I support other candidates. But I certainly think that he represents a fraction of people who are so disgusted with an imperial presidency that they would turn to somebody who I think is more of an entertainer than a politician.
You don't expect him to be your party's nominee?
I don't expect that.
Peter, thank you. Why has Hillary Clinton lost 20 percentage points in Iowa? Question 1, why is she behind in New Hampshire, behind Bernie Sanders? Talk to me about the Hillary Clinton campaign you've seen unfold in the last 6-9 months.
Sure. Well, look, Bernie Sanders, first of all, is raising issues that concern middle-class people. And that's to his credit. I mean, I just talked with a constituent of mine yesterday who's basically lost his pension. And he felt like it was something that would be protected, and it wasn't. So he speaks to people who recognize that the middle class is being diminished terribly in this country. And people need to be able to support their family in dignity. And I look at so many of the bills we passed in this legislature the governor pushed, like prevailing wage and other laws, no more equal pay for equal work, things of that sort that really hurt the middle class directly. And so I think that he's been able to sort of ignite that element of the party that is very concerned about those things. Now, Hillary Clinton's talking about those same issues. And, you usually start high and it always narrows, it always will. So, but I still suspect that Hillary Clinton is going to be extremely strong, and I expect her to be the nominee. Now, Bernie Sanders is doing well in his neighboring state of New Hampshire. He's from Vermont. He knows many people. He's well organized there. But Hillary still has a lead in, virtually everywhere else in the country, and for the most part, leading, every politician on the Republican side nationally, including Scott Walker, by a big margin here in Wisconsin.
So one thing I do agree is about how the middle class is suffering under Barack Obama. You are exactly right. 8 years, so are they suffering?
Well, you know what? I think the good news is that the president has worked so hard. The economy's never been stronger. I mean, we heard from the chief economist from Chase that finally, jobs are picking up, things are moving forward. But this discrepancy between those at the top and the middle class to get their wage, their wage to be bolstered, that's where you see the big gap, and that's what we have to address now.
So you're a Hillary supporter, correct?
I support Hillary.
Okay. Now, if you go back to your office and it's Vice President Biden on the phone, and he says, Peter, should I run? What advice are you going to give the Vice President?
Look, I think highly of Vice President. I think he's been a terrific Vice President. He's a terrific senator. But I think that I think Hillary's really a person that has the background, the energy, the idea is to lead our country forward at this point. That's what I
Gentlemen,
tell them.
thank you very much. The fall session preview of Civil Dialogue. I want to thank Assembly Speaker Robin Voss and Democratic Leader Peter Barca. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thanks, good to be with you. Yep.
I hope Biden runs.
I hope Trump's your nominee.
That was great. That was